Hello, everybody. Welcome to Unfudge Your Marketing. This is a show where I chat with business owners who have their own marketing missteps, mishaps, and things that didn't go quite as planned. Most importantly, we share the lessons that they've learned along the way for all of you, our listeners. I'm your host. I'm Christy Mitchell. I'm a marketing strategist and consultant, and I work with service-based business owners who have built their business on referrals and word of mouth. And they get to a point where they know they want to grow for the future and they need to finally think strategic about their marketing plan. I am so excited today to welcome Andrew Stout onto the show. Andrew is the host of Let's Be Diverse, an HR podcast where he shares insights on HR and leadership topics and personal anecdotes. As an empathetic and innovative HR professional, his goal is to inspire like-minded individuals who believe that the workplace should be a safe place to succeed and grow. Together, let's explore different perspectives and create meaningful conversations. Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I was saying just before we started it, it's such a thrill to get to talk to you. It's twice now that we get to do something like this, so I'm super thrilled.
Yes. So I always like to give our guests a sense of how I met, or give our audience a sense of how I met our guests. So Andrew and I met on LinkedIn. I have a lot of connections in the HR space, and so LinkedIn works its magic. And Andrew and I came across each other and started to get to know each other. And I had the honor of being a guest on his podcast last year, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And we've stayed in touch through LinkedIn. So I know that Andrew has a common experience in terms of some of the challenges and realizations and lessons learned that you've taken away from starting your own podcast. So I don't want to ruin all of the good stuff, but I'll just tee it up by saying that I think a lot of people who start podcasts end up falling into some of the same traps or misconceptions maybe of starting a podcast. So where do you want to start this conversation, Andrew, regarding marketing and your podcast?
Well, again, thanks for having me on today. I really appreciate it. I would say the first area that I probably would say is, podcasts are not easy. They're not easy to start, or else, and there's millions and millions of people are doing them. And there's so many people that have started them. I know there's a lot of my connections that when I first started being a little bit more active on LinkedIn, they were doing podcasts as well. And a lot of them are no longer doing their podcasts. And for a lot of reasons is because of the work that it entails to put in. And they just didn't feel like they were getting enough out of it, or they didn't think that people were listening or getting their message or what have you. So my first thought is, whatever you're trying to put out there, someone's listening. So I will say, and I'm sure that you noticed this, Christy, that there's a lot of people on there, and I call them LinkedIn lurkers. So there are people on there who are on LinkedIn. They don't comment, they don't post, they don't do anything. They look at what other people are doing. And those are people that might be listening to the stuff that you produce. They might even listen to your episodes that you put out there, Christy, but they just don't comment.
Mm-hmm.
But, every once in a while, you're going to get that message from that person to say, hi, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Steve, and I've been watching or listening to your stuff, the content you're putting out there. And I just want to tell you that it's great. It's been meaningful. I enjoy it. I love it. So that's the type of stuff that you want. That's the type of messages that you want to hear. And that's the type of stuff that's going to keep you going. So my first message is as we're getting into the conversation, is to stick with it.
Yeah. So starting a podcast. Yeah, for sure. It's so funny you bring up this point too, because I was just looking through my own library on my iPhone of podcasts that I've subscribed to. And so many of them because I haven't cleaned it up in a while. So many of them haven't posted an episode in the last year or two even. And I'm like, oh man, I don't know the numbers for it. I don't know if you do, like the success rate after year one, or I don't know any of those stats, but I'm sure that there's a lot that start and don't continue.
Yeah, they say, I was told by a lot of people when I first started that usually you have to get to your first 10. Once you get to your first 10, then after that, then you're going to continue. So I would say it's
Mm,
kind of almost like a habit, right? So you're
yes.
creating a habit of producing, putting stuff out. And I think once you get into that habit, and each time you put one out, it gets a lot easier
Yep.
to put them out there. So it's just a matter, I think,
Yeah.
getting to that first step of that first 10 is, I would say, a milestone for a lot of people.
Yes. Yeah, that's such a great point. So if we can go back for a second, Andrew,
Hmm.
to when you were getting ready to start your podcast,
Hmm.
what were you thinking, or maybe looking back now, you wish you were thinking in terms of marketing?
So the first thing I'm gonna say is, and I love this topic. You and I talked about this before weeks ago about what we're gonna talk about today, and I just love this topic. So the first thing that I noticed was I had no idea what direction it was gonna go in. I had no idea what the interest level was gonna be of it. So I thought I'm just gonna do it as a side gig, as a pastime, something I was going to do. I had lots of stuff I wanted to talk about, and I felt I had stories that I wanted to tell. So I thought I'll just do it. And my main focus was going to be on all my friends that I have back home and specifically on Facebook. I figured I'm just going to put it out there. And because they know me, they're going to listen. And I learned very, very quickly that that was not the case. Um, there were more people that I never met or that I didn't know that were listening rather than the people that I've known for 20, 25, 30 years. So that was really the first interesting thing for me was that, noticing that. And I guess it's kind of like when you open up a restaurant and you get people, you open up a restaurant and you have that first day opening and you think, we're open, here we come. The people are going to start to show up, but it doesn't work that way. And I realized that very quickly.
Yes. That's so, I'm laughing because I've heard this before. I actually have a friend who's in the acupuncture business, and she said she remembers, like, I mean, she's super successful now, but she remembers those early days of like sitting in her brand new office, like that she owned, and just like waiting. So that's the image that came to mind
Mm-hmm.
as you were saying that. And I think that is, I it's funny because when I talk about my marketing funnel framework as a way to build a strategic marketing plan, right? It's attract at the top, getting on in front of people, then it's convert, getting people to fill out a form.
Right.
So then you can move on to nurture, which is stay in touch with them over time through things like email marketing, and then closing the deal at the bottom of the funnel. And
Mm-hmm.
I've had this conversation about where does podcasting fit in that marketing funnel? And I think a lot of times people think like, oh, well, it's attract, right? I'm going to create this podcast and then I'm just going to get my name out in front of so many more people because now I'm a podcaster.
Right.
And what would you say to someone who is thinking that? Like, I'm going to start this podcast and I'm going to get in front of people. What would you say? I have
I
my
would
own thoughts, but I want you to go first.
I would say that so I call myself one of my core values is rapport building. I feel like that is one of the most important things that you can do no matter what you're doing. So I would say that if you're starting a podcast, the thing that you need to do is you need to build rapport. Just you putting out the content out there is not going to get the results and not going to get people to listen because they don't know that a lot of people don't know that it's out there, it's available. So
Mm-hmm.
you need to do your work and you need to be diligent at it and you need to talk about it and you need to get on different things like today to talk about what you're doing and why you do it. So I think, so myself, I try or I schedule one-on-one conversations with somebody over the phone, uh, pretty much almost every day. And the conversations vary from some are 20 minutes, some of them are half hour. I've gone some that are an hour and a little bit over, and it just depends on the individual. So, but that is so important to me because the first question that everybody asks me is, tell me about your podcast. Tell me your podcast. What is it all about? Why
Mm-hmm.
what made you start it? What
Mm-hmm.
why did you want to do it? What was your what was your passion for starting it? So by doing these conversations,
Find it. And that's not the case usually. It could
right,
happen, right? Especially if your podcast is featured on, a
right,
bunch of the platforms out there. It's available.
right,
It's possible you could be found that way. But I
right.
think a lot of times people find out about podcasts not through the platforms, but through other ways, right? Because a friend
Absolutely.
recommends it, or they see it on social media, or they got an email about it, or
Mhm,
they saw someone who was a guest on it, or whatever
mhm,
that may be. And so I think that that's a really important lesson and something that you and I talked about, as we were preparing for this conversation, that if anyone out there is thinking they want to create a podcast, by all means, I think Andrew and I both would be super supportive,
mhm,
but go into it with the right expectations. It's not
mhm,
an if you build it, they will come kind of thing. It's a
mhm,
you build it and then you have to like
mhm.
really constantly market it.
Right. And I will definitely add to that. So there are a lot of people who I've spoken to who are thinking about starting a podcast, but they're not there yet. So my advice to anybody is that if you're going to start a podcast, again, I agree 100%. You said I would be all for you. And I know, Christy, you would as well, and any other podcaster would. But you have to figure out your passion. So if you're just doing it, so a perfect example, Christy, you're a marketing person. A perfect person example would be putting your mission, vision, and values of your company on a website because someone told you that you need to have that on your website, and just dribbling something up to have it on a website, and then someone approaching you and asking a question about your mission, vision, and values, and you can't answer it. That would be, for me, what the podcasting would be, is if someone's
Mm-hmm.
asking you why you're doing it, you got to know why you're doing it and what you're passionate for. And and that person has to feel your answer on the other end. So whether you're
Yeah.
on the phone with them, on a video, face to face, you have to feel that passion from them of what they're doing. And if you do, it's a win.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you brought this up. So Andrew and I talked at the very beginning before we went live. I don't prepare for these. I mean, the only thing we do is to pick which marketing mistake or mishap we're going to talk about. That's it.
Right. Right.
There's no set question. So I always love this part of this process and just like where the conversation is going. So it's so funny that you brought that up, because when I talk about my journey into getting into podcasting, I'll tell people like, yeah, I always kind of thought in the back of my mind, someday I'll probably start a podcast. But there was nothing that was like super compelling or like, oh my God, I know I need to do this until this year. And it was
Mm-hmm.
through like a bunch of conversations that happened in a short period of time, and kind of me working on a different side to my business that I haven't worked on before. And just kind of all these things came together. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to start a show where I talk to business owners about their marketing mistakes, because I mean, quite frankly, I think everybody has them. Finding the people who are willing to talk about it and be open and vulnerable, that's a process. But it's time and time again, I talk to so many business owners, especially on discovery calls, right? Of them, wanting to learn about me and my services and how I approach marketing. And they tell me these stories of like, we hired a past agency and these are all the things that went wrong. And we're really looking for this type of help. Or whatever that example is. I hear all different variations of those things. Or, well,
Mm-hmm.
we hired someone for marketing, it didn't work out. We hired another person, it didn't work. Time and time again, I keep hearing these stories. And, right, hindsight's 2020. You can look back and say, well, this is what we did wrong and this is how we made a bad decision. But I wanted to give a platform for those conversations so that other business owners can learn from that. And to your point, that's what like fired me up. And I was like, okay, I'm ready to do this and I'm going to launch it. And here's what I'm going to do. And it is, like you said, the excitement has to be there. Otherwise, I think that it doesn't, like we started this conversation, right? It's not an easy thing to do. It takes a lot of work and a lot of diligence and consistency. And so I think it's great that we're tying these points together in that you need to have that passion for that specific thing you want to do and your purpose in launching a podcast. And then that's going to help you be more consistent with it because you feel so strongly.
And I love that you said stories, because, you being a marketing person, you have to market yourself. You have to talk about yourself. And what better way to talk about yourself and tell stories about yourself on a platform like this? There is no better
Mhm.
way. And it is an inexpensive way to do so as well. It's not going to cost you hundreds and thousands of dollars to do this, not even thousands of dollars. It's very inexpensive, but people want to
Mhm.
see, they want to hear stories. And I'm going to use the word vulnerability. People want to see the vulnerability in people. They don't want to know that you made $100,000 in a 6-month time span. They want to know the vulnerability side of you. You just said it before. This is what this is what happened when I hired a marketing department and marketing team, or this is the marketing team that I had, and this is the struggles that we had, and this is what we went through. And by this is what we reviewed everything, and this is what we decided to do, and this is how we decided to handle that. That's what people want to hear.
Mhm. Yeah, those real stories go such a long way. And I love that point that a podcast gives you that opportunity
Mm-hmm.
to be vulnerable, to be open, to share stories and have guests share their stories,
Right.
to build that relationship with your audience. So actually, for a second, I want to go back to how I was talking about the marketing funnel framework and where does podcasting fall in that
Right.
framework, right? So I
Right.
think in my mind, it's very clear when you are a guest on somebody else's podcast, that is very much like top of the funnel attract, right? Because
Right.
you're relying on their audience for the podcast that they have built. So it's a
Correct.
great opportunity. And again, if listeners are thinking they might want to get into podcasting, here's another tip, right? Go be a guest on other people's podcasts first.
Mm-hmm.
To get that, I think it
Mm-hmm.
just I made that a goal one year, and I think I was on like 30 podcasts that year, and it was
Yep.
like it's just the repetition and the practice of it. And then you pick
Yep.
up things that you might want to do or not do when you start your own. And so
Yep.
I think guesting on other people's podcasts, definitely top of the funnel.
Right.
And I would argue that starting your own podcast is really more of the nurture, like the middle of the funnel,
Mm-hmm.
because you create that content and you want to bring people in, whether you're getting people to subscribe to your podcast, whatever. But the idea is you're going to keep creating content consistently. And if they're subscribed to it, they're going to keep getting that content consistently
Right.
so that, you can nurture that relationship and build the trust that you need to potentially, turn them into a client.
Right. And I think, just stepping on that as well, when you're starting your podcast and when you're speaking to people, yes, you want to try to get on other people's podcasts, but uh, I would say don't be afraid to ask. Like the worst thing that if you're afraid of hearing the word no, then you have to change your framework on that. Like, you have to not be afraid of hearing no, because you're going to hear no's, but you're going to hear yeses. So
Mhm.
just ask. And that's what I do, is I ask people. And if they say yes, they say yes. If they say no, that's okay. I'm not offended. I'm not hurt. It's just not, maybe it's just not the right opportunity, or it just doesn't work out. But if I don't ask, I'm never going to get what I really want. Right.
Yes. Yes. So, Andrew, with the time that we have left, I would love to get your thoughts and experiences on how do you effectively market a podcast? What
So
has worked well for you?
I would say that the thing that you got to do is you mentioned it. I mean, I'd say content. I'd say you have to produce. So what I do is I focus on putting out regular content, and I focus on, so I mentioned earlier about the process of having meet and greets with people. And my purpose of that is that some of those people, it's a good possibility that they'll end up being a guest, or I'm going to end up collaborating with them in some capacity. So my
Mhm.
idea is to build rapport with that person. And I'd say the key to when you're producing an episode, which is what I do, is I focus on the rapport part of the episode. So I'm building rapport with that individual. So by the time we get on an episode, it's almost like we've known each other for 20, 30 years, which is what I've heard from people who have listened to my episodes of my podcast. I literally had somebody ask me this week, I listened to this episode with so and so, how long have you known them? And I said, oh, probably about a year or so. And they said, oh my God, I feel like you sound like you've known them for 15, 20 years. And I said, well, that's awesome. That is exactly what I'm trying to accomplish. So I'm super happy that you noticed that. And that's just one person. So there might be, we talked earlier about lurkers. There might be other people that listen that may not notice that have just never said anything. So I would say the rapport part, getting good content out, and just showing your passion for what you do is probably 3 keys that I would suggest.
Yeah, those are great. And I know, so that it's funny because I was like reflecting before our conversation today on my own podcast journey, because I'm still very new to it. And just the things that I could be doing better to market my own podcast. I mean, I include them in my email newsletter. I might do a one-off email just about, like a recap of my most recent episodes. I post about it on LinkedIn, but not nearly enough. I need to do more of that. And so those are kind of all. Oh, and the other thing I was going to say was getting your guests to help promote it too, right? To share, and I've seen, right, because I've been on a lot of podcasts, I've seen different hosts handle this very differently. Like some don't even notify you when your episode goes live, and you can't even share it because you don't know unless you go looking for it. And some are very like strict in the application process. Like if you come on my podcast, you agree to do these things and share it with your network. I'd say the majority in my experience have been a middle of the road. Like, hey, it would be great if you could share this on social and send it in an email to your list, just to help promote the show. But that's another thing to think about in terms of marketing your podcast, is leveraging those, to your point, relationships and rapport building, and just thinking of all of those ways that you can help spread the word about your podcast so people can learn about it and start following it. And then as long as you're sticking with, a consistent publishing schedule, you're nurturing them.
Yep. I agree with you 100% on that. I just had a conversation with somebody about that this week, and they were saying that talking about podcasts and exactly what you just said, that some people, their guests, they promote it to the T and some don't. And every once in a while that's going to happen. But I'll go back to the rapport building part. I believe that when you do that, when you've built rapport with somebody, you've built that trust, that genuine connection with them. And by the time it comes out, I'm not talking about like, talking to them every day or talking to them, because everyone's busy. But, I think you build that rapport, the regular check-in, how, even sending a message. I pick somebody out once a week, and somebody that I've had on, and I send them a message, hey, just want to check in, thinking about you, want to see how you're doing. And I think when you build that, I would say the majority of people will be willing to do that for you. I had a leader that told me years ago, like many, many moons ago, that said, if you're genuine and with somebody, they're going to either want to work with you, collaborate from you, or buy from you. So I think if you build that genuine connection, they're going to be willing to do anything and everything that they can to help you out, for sure.
Yeah, I love that. I love the emphasis that we've talked about today. Again, completely unplanned, but just the emphasis on relationship and rapport building is huge. And anyone who knows me and the way I approach marketing, it's all about authenticity and building those relationships. So this has been an awesome conversation, Andrew. As we wrap things up, is there anything that you want to leave our listeners with as a final kind of tip related to marketing their podcasts?
I would just say the only thing that I would say is, if you don't know what, something, or you don't know how to do something, there's a lot of people that are shy out there, or they feel like they're going to figure it out. And that's okay if you want to figure it out, but don't be afraid to ask for help. If you have a question, like I'll say, I've messaged Christy before, and I've asked her, her opinion on something, and she's answered me back. And, it's, again, if you build that rapport, you can have that opportunity that you can throw things back and forth and collaborate with everybody. So my message on at the end, when I end all my podcasts, is if we all work together, we can accomplish anything. And that is through rapport building. You can definitely accomplish whatever you want, and you're not alone. So just, contact people. And if people say, reach out to me if you need anything, well, they're doing it for a reason. And, I'm not saying to message them 100 times a day, but, if you do have a question for them, message them and they will help you out for sure.
Yes, I love that. And I think that, we haven't mentioned it specifically, but Andrew and I both are very involved with LinkedIn. And so when I think a lot of times, at least I know when I'm referring to like posting content and engaging with people, like LinkedIn is where it's at for me. And I think it's just such a great platform for exactly what you're saying,
Yep.
asking people for help. Because like you said, the worst they're going to say is no. And I think the majority of people are willing to do it. They're happy to share their wisdom and their expertise and to support each other. So I absolutely love that. Andrew, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. Very last thing, if people want to learn more about you and your podcast, where should they go?
You can find me on LinkedIn. So it's Andrew Stout, and Stout is with an E, like the beer Stout, but with an E on the end. That's probably the primary place that you could probably find me. I love to chat. I love to get to know people, and I'd love to have a conversation with you. Again, I can talk about anything, leadership, HR, podcasting till the cows come home. So I'm always willing to have a conversation on that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew. I really appreciate your time and your willingness to come